A gunshot shattered the peaceful night air of Willow Creek, sending Penelope Granger scrambling from her small cabin with nothing but her 6-month-old daughter clutched to her chest and a satchel hastily thrown over her shoulder. The year was 1876, and in the untamed Wyoming Territory, justice often came at the end of a barrel rather than a courtroom. Tears streamed down her face as she looked back at the home she'd built with her late husband, now illuminated by approaching torchlight as angry voices grew closer. "Find her. Find the woman and that bastard child," a gruff voice bellowed, the words slurring together in drunken rage. Penelope's heart hammered against her ribs as she plunged into the dense forest that bordered the eastern edge of her property. Baby Emma, somehow sensing the danger, remained mercifully quiet against her mother's breast, her tiny fingers curled into the rough fabric of Penelope's shawl. The mob had formed quickly after Jasper Holloway, the most powerful rancher in the territory, discovered his son had been killed in a fair fight by Penelope's husband Thomas 3 months prior. Thomas had only defended himself against the younger Holloway's drunken assault, but no one dared testify against the rancher's family. When Thomas died of pneumonia last month, Holloway saw his opportunity for revenge against the widow and child. Pine needles crunched beneath Penelope's boots as she navigated through the darkness, the moonlight barely filtering through the thick canopy above. The baby squirmed against her, and Penelope paused to adjust her hold, her breathing labored from exertion and fear. "Where you heading in such a hurry, madam?" The voice came from directly ahead, causing Penelope to stumble backward with a stifled scream. A tall figure emerged from behind a broad oak tree, the silver star on his chest catching the moonlight. Marshal Matthew O'Brien stepped forward, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "Marshal," she gasped, clutching Emma tighter. "Please, they're coming for us." "Holloway's men, I heard," he said, his voice low and steady. "Been expecting something like this since Thomas passed." Distant shouts echoed behind them, followed by the sound of horses pushing through underbrush. "You need to get as far from here as possible," Marshal O'Brien said, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Head north toward the old mining trail. It'll take you up to Peterson's Pass." "But that's 2 days' journey on foot," Penelope whispered, desperation edging her voice. "With Emma, I won't make it before they catch up." The baby whimpered softly, and the marshal's eyes softened as they fell on the child's face. "I'll guard every step till sunrise," he said, removing his duster and draping it over Penelope's shoulders. "By then, we'll be far enough that they won't pick up our trail till it's too late." "Why would you risk your badge for us?" she asked, studying his face for any sign of deception. Matthew O'Brien had been Willow Creek's marshal for just over a year. He was respected but still considered an outsider, having come from Kansas City with little explanation for his arrival. Some said he was running from something, but none questioned his commitment to the law. "Because what Holloway's doing ain't justice, it's vengeance," he replied, his voice hardening. "And no child should pay for the sins Holloway imagines." The voices grew louder behind them. "We need to move now," Matthew said, taking her elbow gently and guiding her deeper into the forest. For hours they pushed through the dense woods, Matthew occasionally doubling back to ensure they weren't being followed. Penelope's arms ached from carrying Emma, but she refused to complain. Each time she stumbled on the uneven ground, Matthew was there, his steady hand at her elbow. When Emma began to fuss from hunger, they stopped beside a small stream. Penelope settled against a tree trunk to feed her child while Matthew kept watch, his back respectfully turned. "I've been the marshal here for 14 months, he said quietly as he scanned the darkness. "And in all that time, I've never seen a mother as brave as you." Penelope looked up in surprise. I'm terrified, Marshal, not brave. Matthew glanced back at her, his face softened by something she couldn't quite name. Being scared and being brave aren't opposites, Mrs. Granger. Seems to me, doing what needs doing despite your fear is the only kind of courage that matters. The simple truth of his words warmed her more than any fire could have. As the first hints of dawn lightened the eastern sky, they found themselves at the base of a steep incline that would lead to Peterson's Pass. Matthew scouted ahead, returning with news that the pass was clear. "What will you do now?" Penelope asked, adjusting Emma in her arms. "Your job, your life in Willow Creek. Some things matter more than a badge," he replied, his eyes meeting hers. "I've wired a friend in Silver Ridge. He's preparing a place for you both to stay, and I'll escort you there." And then, Matthew's gaze shifted to the horizon. "One day at a time, Mrs. Granger. For now, I'll guard your steps till we reach safety." As the sun crested the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Penelope felt something she hadn't experienced in months' hope. With Emma sleeping peacefully against her chest, and Matthew O'Brien walking steadfastly beside her, the path ahead seemed less daunting than the one behind. The journey to Silver Ridge would be long and fraught with danger, but for the first time since Thomas's death, Penelope didn't feel alone. The Marshal's presence beside her was like an anchor in a storm, and though she couldn't explain it, something told her that this unexpected alliance was the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one that might eventually heal the wounds of the past. As they crested the first ridge, Matthew paused, looking back toward Willow Creek one last time. "No turning back now," he said softly. Penelope nodded, shifting Emma in her arms. "No turning back." The sun climbed higher as they continued their journey north, away from vengeance, and toward an uncertain future that somehow, against all reason, felt filled with promise. The morning sun beat down mercilessly as they traversed the rocky terrain of Peterson's Pass. Emma had begun to fuss in the growing heat, and Penelope's arms trembled from exhaustion. Matthew noticed her fatigue and stopped, reaching into his saddlebag for a canteen. "We should rest a spell," he said, offering her the water. "There's shade in that grove of cottonwoods." Penelope gratefully accepted the canteen, taking small sips before moistening a cloth to cool Emma's flushed face. "How much farther to Silver Ridge?" "Another day and a half if we keep this pace," Matthew replied, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. "But we need to be careful. Holloway has connections throughout the territory." They settled beneath the cottonwoods, the dappled sunlight dancing across the ground. Emma, content after feeding, gurgled happily as she grasped at Penelope's finger. "She has your eyes," Matthew observed, the corners of his mouth lifting in a rare smile. "And her father's spirit," Penelope said softly, a familiar ache filling her chest at the mention of Thomas. "He would have moved mountains to keep her safe." Matthew nodded, his expression solemn. "Thomas was a good man. What happened with Holloway's son wasn't his fault." "You knew Thomas well?" Penelope asked, surprised. Her husband had rarely mentioned the Marshal. "Not well, but enough to respect him," Matthew replied. "He stood up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy." "That's rare in these parts." A comfortable silence fell between them as Emma drifted off to sleep. Penelope studied Matthew's profile, the strong jawline, the thoughtful eyes that seemed to carry the weight of untold stories. She had noticed him in town, of course. The arrival of a new marshal was always cause for gossip in a small community like Willow Creek. But she had been so consumed with Thomas's illness, and then his death, followed by the demands of raising Emma alone, that she had paid little attention to the man behind the badge. "What brought you to Willow Creek, Marshal?" she asked, curiosity finally getting the better of her. Matthew's shoulders tensed slightly. Just needed a fresh start. Kansas City had too many memories. Bad ones. He met her gaze, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. Some. Lost my wife and son to typhoid 3 years ago. Afterward, the city felt empty. Penelope's heart constricted with unexpected empathy. I'm sorry. I know that hollow feeling all too well. Seems we both know something about starting over, Matthew said quietly. The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Matthew was on his feet instantly, hand moving to his revolver. Stay here, he whispered, moving to the edge of the grove. Penelope gathered Emma close, her pulse quickening. Through the trees, she could see 3 riders approaching from the south, the direction of Willow Creek. Holloway's men, Matthew confirmed, returning to her side. We need to move. Now. With practiced efficiency, he helped her gather their meager belongings. Emma, disturbed from her sleep, began to whimper. "SHH, sweet one," Penelope soothed, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain calm. Matthew led them deeper into the woods, away from the trail. They moved as quietly as possible, Matthew occasionally lifting low-hanging branches for Penelope to pass. The riders' voices grew louder, then began to fade as they continued down the main trail. They're following the most direct route to Silver Ridge, Matthew whispered. We'll take the old trapper's path instead. It's longer but safer. As the day wore on, the terrain became increasingly difficult. The trapper's path was overgrown and steep in places, forcing them to move at a painfully slow pace. Emma grew cranky in the heat, and Penelope's arms ached from carrying her. Let me, Matthew offered, extending his arms toward the child. Penelope hesitated only briefly before transferring Emma to him. The marshal held the baby with surprising ease, cradling her head with a gentleness that belied his rugged exterior. You've done this before, Penelope observed. A shadow passed over Matthew's face. My son, James, was just a bit older than Emma when. He trailed off, focusing on the baby in his arms. Emma, remarkably, settled against Matthew's chest, her tiny hand grasping the fabric of his shirt as her eyelids grew heavy. She trusts you, Penelope said softly. Children have good instincts, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. By late afternoon, they had reached a small clearing beside a narrow stream. The sun was beginning to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in vivid hues of orange and pink. We should make camp here for the night, Matthew suggested, gently transferring the sleeping Emma back to Penelope's arms. I'll gather some wood for a small fire. While Matthew disappeared into the surrounding forest, Penelope laid Emma on a soft patch of grass, using her shawl as a makeshift blanket. She splashed cool water from the stream on her face, trying to wash away the dust and fatigue of the day's journey. When Matthew returned with an armful of firewood, his expression was troubled. What is it? Penelope asked, immediately alert. Saw some tracks heading north, parallel to the stream, he explained, arranging the wood in a small pit he'd dug. They're fresh. Could be trappers or hunters, but we can't be certain. Or Holloway's men taking a different route, Penelope said, her stomach knotting with anxiety. Matthew nodded grimly. We'll keep the fire small and douse it once we've eaten. Can't risk drawing attention. As darkness fell, they sat close to the tiny fire, sharing the jerky and hardtack Matthew had packed. Emma, awake now, sat contentedly on Penelope's lap, fascinated by the dancing flames. She's an easy baby, Matthew remarked, offering Emma a small piece of softened hardtack to gum. Only recently, Penelope admitted with a tired smile. The first few months she cried from sundown to sunrise. Thomas used to walk the floor with her for hours. That's what fathers do, Matthew said, his gaze distant. I remember those nights well, exhausting but precious. Penelope studied him in the firelight, seeing beyond the stern marshal to the man who had loved and lost. "You were a good father." "I tried to be," he said simply. "Never enough time, though. Always thought there'd be more years ahead." The raw honesty in his voice struck a chord within Penelope. Since Thomas's death, she'd avoided speaking of her grief, focusing instead on survival. But here, in this quiet clearing with a man who understood loss, she felt the tight band around her heart loosen. "Sometimes I wake up reaching for Thomas," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then I remember, and it's like losing him all over again." Matthew nodded, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "The mornings are the hardest, that moment between dreaming and waking when everything seems normal, then reality crashes back. Does it ever get easier?" She asked, the question she'd been afraid to voice aloud. Matthew considered this, his gaze moving to Emma, who had fallen asleep against her mother's chest. "Not easier, different. The sharp edges wear down. You learn to carry it differently." They fell silent, each lost in their own memories. The fire burned low, casting long shadows against the surrounding trees. In the distance, an owl called, its mournful cry echoing through the night. "I'll take first watch," Matthew said finally, rising to his feet. "Try to get some sleep." Penelope arranged her satchel as a pillow and curled around Emma on the soft ground near the dying embers. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. She watched as Matthew moved to the edge of the clearing, his silhouette strong and vigilant against the night sky. In the span of a single day, this man had risked everything to protect her and Emma. The badge he wore spoke of his commitment to justice, but his actions revealed something deeper, a fundamental decency that had become rare in a world governed by men like Holloway. As the stars wheeled overhead and Emma's steady breathing provided a gentle rhythm to the night, Penelope found herself wondering what might have happened if they'd met under different circumstances. If grief and danger hadn't been the catalysts that brought them together on this desperate flight through the wilderness. With these thoughts swirling in her mind, she finally drifted into a fitful sleep. Matthew O'Brien's watchful presence a surprising comfort in the vast, dark forest. In the gray light of dawn, Penelope awoke to find Matthew kneeling beside her, his hand gently shaking her shoulder. "We need to move," he whispered urgently. "Riders coming from the south." Penelope was instantly alert, gathering Emma, who still slumbered peacefully. They quickly packed their meager belongings, Matthew working methodically to erase all signs of their camp. "How many?" Penelope asked, securing Emma in a sling across her chest. "4, maybe 5, Matthew replied grimly. "Moving fast." They set off northward, following the winding course of the stream. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Under different circumstances, Penelope might have found the forest beautiful, but now every snapping twig and rustling leaf sent spikes of fear through her. By mid-morning, they had reached a rocky outcropping that offered a clear view of the valley below. Matthew crouched at the edge, studying the terrain through narrowed eyes. "There," he said, pointing to a thin column of smoke rising from the forest about 2 miles to the east. "That's likely Holloway's men making camp. Are they gaining on us?" Matthew's expression was grim. "They're cutting across country while we're following the stream. We need to change direction, head northwest toward Devil's Ridge." "But that's Blackfoot territory," Penelope protested, her arms tightening around Emma. Stories of skirmishes between settlers and the native tribes were common, though Penelope had always suspected much of it was exaggerated by men seeking to justify their own violence. "It's our best chance," Matthew insisted. "Holloway's men won't follow us there, and I've traded with the Blackfoot before. They're not the monsters people make them out to be." Reluctantly, Penelope nodded her agreement. They descended from the outcropping and struck out northwest, leaving the security of the stream behind. The terrain became increasingly rugged, with sharp inclines and dense underbrush that tore at their clothing and scratched their skin. Emma, disturbed by the jostling, began to cry soft, pitiful sobs that tore at Penelope's heart. "She's hungry and uncomfortable," Penelope said, the exhaustion evident in her voice. "We need to stop." Matthew scanned their surroundings, then pointed to a small hollow sheltered by a fallen pine. "There. It's defensible and the tree will hide us from view." They settled in the hollow, and Penelope turned away slightly to feed Emma. The baby latched on eagerly, her cries subsiding to contented murmurs. Matthew kept watch, his revolver resting on his knee. "Tell me about Silver Ridge," Penelope said, desperate for conversation to distract from her fear. "What kind of place is it?" Matthew's face softened slightly. "Small but growing, built around a silver mine that's still producing well. My friend Jacob owns the general store there. He and his wife, Sarah, have a room above the shop they've offered to you and Emma." "And they won't mind harboring fugitives?" Penelope asked, a bitter edge to her voice. "You're not fugitives," Matthew said firmly. "You're survivors, and Jacob owes me a favor from back in our Kansas days." Penelope studied his profile, curious. "What kind of favor?" Matthew hesitated, then shrugged. "Pulled his son from a river during a flash flood, nothing anyone else wouldn't have done." "Except they didn't." "You did," Penelope observed quietly. A flush crept up Matthew's neck, and he changed the subject. "Once we reach Silver Ridge, you'll be able to start fresh. It's a good community, mostly families. The school is looking for a teacher." "I taught for a year before I married Thomas," Penelope admitted, surprised by the spark of interest she felt. "Though that seems a lifetime ago now." "It could be a good fit," Matthew suggested. "The children there need education, and Emma would have a stable home." The simple domestic picture he painted was appealing: a clean, sunlit classroom, Emma growing up among other children, a life free from the shadow of Holloway's vendetta. But something in his tone gave Penelope pause. "And where will you be, Marshal?" she asked, meeting his gaze directly. Matthew looked away, his jaw tightening. "I have unfinished business in Willow Creek." "You're going back?" Penelope couldn't hide her shock. "Holloway will have you removed as marshal or worse." "Probably," he agreed grimly, "but I took an oath to uphold the law. Holloway's reign of terror needs to end, and I aim to see that it does." "At the cost of your life," Penelope challenged, unexpected anger flaring within her. "What good will your noble sacrifice do for the people of Willow Creek if you're dead?" Emma, sensing her mother's distress, pulled away from her breast with a whimper. Penelope quickly soothed her, patting her back gently. Matthew's expression softened as he watched the interaction between mother and child. "Some things are worth the risk, Mrs. Granger." "Penelope," she corrected him. "After all we've been through, I think you can use my given name." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Penelope, then." Before he could say more, a distant shout echoed through the forest, followed by the sharp report of a rifle. Matthew was on his feet instantly, peering cautiously around the fallen pine. "Holloway's men," he confirmed, his voice tight. "They've picked up our trail faster than I expected." Penelope's heart raced as she quickly adjusted her clothing and secured Emma back in the sling. "How far?" "Less than a mile. We need to move. Now." They abandoned the shelter of the hollow, pushing deeper into the forest with renewed urgency. The ground began to slope upward as they approached the foothills of Devil's Ridge. The terrain was treacherous loose shale that shifted underfoot and thorny brush that snagged their clothing. Emma, overtired and jostled by their hurried pace, began to cry in earnest, her wails cutting through the forest silence. I can't quiet her, Penelope said desperately, trying to bounce the baby gently as they moved. Matthew surveyed the path ahead, his expression grim. There's a box canyon about a quarter-mile ahead. Good defensible position, but it's a dead end, Penelope finished for him, understanding the implication. He nodded grimly. I could lead them away, buy you time to circle back and head northeast towards Silver Ridge. No, Penelope said firmly, shifting Emma to her other arm. We stay together. Something flashed in Matthew's eyes, respect, perhaps, or admiration. All right, the canyon it is. They pressed forward, Emma's cries gradually subsiding to hiccuping sobs as exhaustion overcame her distress. The forest thinned as they climbed, the tall pines giving way to scrubby juniper and sage. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and Penelope could feel sweat trickling down her back beneath her heavy dress. When they finally reached the entrance to the box canyon, Penelope gasped at the sight. Towering red rock walls rose on 3 sides, creating a natural fortress that narrowed to a point about 100 yards in. A small spring bubbled from the base of the western wall, creating a shallow pool surrounded by lush vegetation, a stark contrast to the arid landscape beyond. It's beautiful, she murmured, momentarily forgetting their dire circumstances. And defensible, Matthew added, already moving to position himself behind a large boulder near the canyon's entrance. There's only one way in or out, and I can see anyone approaching from here. Penelope carried Emma to the spring, grateful for the cool water and shade provided by the rock walls. She dampened a cloth and gently wiped the baby's flushed face, cooing softly to her. Emma's eyelids grew heavy, and she soon drifted off to sleep, exhausted by the day's journey. Matthew joined them, crouching beside the spring to refill their canteens. We should rest while we can. They'll be here before nightfall. How many bullets do you have? Penelope asked quietly, not wanting to disturb Emma. 12 in my gun belt, another 6 in my pocket, he replied matter-of-factly. More than enough. Penelope studied his face, noting the lines of fatigue etched around his eyes. You need sleep, Marshal. I can keep watch for a while. After a moment's hesitation, Matthew nodded, removing his hat and stretching out on the ground beside the spring. Wake me at the first sign of movement, he instructed, his voice already heavy with exhaustion. I will, she promised. As Matthew's breathing deepened in sleep, Penelope gazed around the canyon, wondering if this peaceful spot would be their last stand. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt a strange calm. Whatever happened, she was no longer alone in her fight. This man, who owed her nothing, had risked everything to protect her and Emma. She looked down at her sleeping daughter, then at the slumbering Marshal. In the quiet of the canyon, with danger approaching from all sides, Penelope Granger made a silent vow if they survived this. She would find a way to repay Matthew O'Brien's kindness, whatever the cost. The sun inched across the sky, casting lengthening shadows against the canyon walls. Penelope kept vigil, dividing her attention between the sleeping baby in her arms and the narrow entrance to their sanctuary. Each rustle of sage brush, each cry of a distant hawk caused her heart to skip a beat, but the hours passed without sign of their pursuers. Matthew woke as the sun dipped toward the western horizon, immediately alert and reaching for his revolver. Any sign of them? He asked, his voice rough from sleep. Penelope shook her head. Nothing. It's been quiet, he frowned, getting to his feet to scan the canyon entrance. Too quiet. They should have caught up by now. Perhaps they lost our trail, Penelope suggested hopefully. Perhaps, Matthew agreed, though his expression remained doubtful. Or they're planning something we haven't anticipated. Emma stirred in Penelope's arms, blinking up at her mother with Thomas's dark eyes. The baby smiled, reaching up to touch Penelope's face with tiny fingers. "She's getting stronger every day," Matthew observed, his expression softening as he watched them. "She's a fighter," Penelope agreed, pressing a kiss to Emma's forehead. "Like her father." "And her mother," Matthew added quietly. Their eyes met over Emma's head, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of shared struggle and unexpected connection forged in the crucible of their flight. The moment was shattered by the sharp crack of a rifle. The bullet struck the rock wall just inches from Matthew's head, sending fragments of stone flying. "Get down!" he shouted, drawing his revolver and returning fire toward the canyon entrance. Penelope scrambled behind a large boulder, shielding Emma with her body as the child began to wail in terror. Through gaps in the rocks, she could see 4 riders at the mouth of the canyon, their rifles raised. "Holloway sent us to fetch you, Marshal," one of the men called. "Says you've got something that belongs to him. The woman and child are under my protection," Matthew shouted back, firing another shot that sent one of the riders diving for cover. "Ride back and tell Holloway that his quarrel is with me now." Laughter echoed through the canyon. "Protecting a murderer's widow. That badge don't give you that right." Her husband killed in self-defense, as witnessed by 3 townspeople, Matthew replied, his voice steady despite the danger. "The law cleared him. Holloway is the law in these parts," another voice called. "You're just a hired gun with a shiny star." Matthew glanced back at Penelope, his expression grim. "Stay down," he mouthed before turning his attention back to their attackers. The standoff continued as the sun sank lower, casting the canyon in deepening shadow. Occasional gunfire punctuated the tense silence, neither side gaining advantage. Emma's cries had subsided to whimpering sobs, and Penelope held her close, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed herself. As darkness fell, Matthew worked his way back to Penelope's position, keeping low to avoid presenting a target. "They're settling in for the night," he reported, his voice barely audible above the chirping of crickets. "Probably planning to rush us at first light. What can we do?" Penelope asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Matthew's expression was thoughtful as he surveyed their surroundings. "There might be a way. The back wall of the canyon, it looks scalable in places. You want us to climb out?" Penelope glanced at the imposing rock face, doubt evident in her voice. "With Emma, it's risky," he admitted. "But staying here is certain death. At least this way we have a chance." Penelope looked down at Emma, now sleeping fitfully against her chest. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe." Matthew nodded, his gaze lingering on her face. "We'll wait until the moon rises. That should give us enough light to see the handholds without making us too visible." As they waited, huddled together behind the boulder, Penelope found herself drawing strength from Matthew's solid presence beside her. His shoulder pressed against hers, warm and reassuring in the cooling night air. "Tell me about your wife," she said softly, needing conversation to distract from the fear gnawing at her insides. Matthew stiffened slightly, but after a moment he relaxed. "Her name was Catherine. We grew up together in a small town outside Kansas City. Married young, she was 17, I was 19. What was she like?" A smile touched his lips, visible even in the dim light. "Stubborn, laughed easily, could bake a pie that would make grown men weep." He paused, his voice softening. "She believed in me when no one else did. Supported my decision to become a lawman, even though it terrified her." "She sounds remarkable," Penelope said, imagining the woman who had captured this strong man's heart. "She was," he agreed simply. "What about Thomas? How did you meet?" Penelope smiled at the memory. "He delivered mail to the schoolhouse where I taught. Left me a poem with each delivery. Terrible poetry, honestly, but sincere. After 6 months of poems, he finally worked up the courage to ask me to dinner. Bold man, Matthew commented with a hint of admiration. Not really, Penelope admitted. He stuttered so badly when he asked that I had to finish the question for him. She chuckled softly at the memory. But he was kind and honest, never raised his voice even when we disagreed. When Holloway's son attacked him at the saloon, Thomas tried to walk away 3 times before he was forced to defend himself. Matthew's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers wrapping around her smaller ones. "I'm sorry you lost him." "I'm sorry you lost Catherine," she replied, allowing her hand to remain in his. They sat in companionable silence as the moon rose over the canyon rim, bathing the rocks in silver light. Emma slept peacefully, unaware of the danger or the desperate plan that would soon be put into motion. When the moon was high enough to illuminate the back wall clearly, Matthew rose to his feet. "It's time." Penelope secured Emma in the sling across her chest, making sure the baby was snug against her but could still breathe freely. Matthew divided their meager supplies between them, keeping only his revolver and a small canteen for himself. "I'll go first," he said, approaching the rock face. "Watch where I place my hands and feet. The climb isn't as difficult as it looks. There are natural ledges most of the way up." Penelope nodded, her throat too tight with fear to speak. Matthew began the ascent, testing each handhold before committing his weight to it. Penelope watched anxiously, marking his path in her mind. When he had climbed about 20 feet, he paused on a wide ledge. "Your turn," he called down softly. "Take it slow." With Emma securely fastened to her chest, Penelope approached the rock wall. The first few handholds were easy to find, but as she climbed higher, the exertion and fear made her limbs tremble. Emma, disturbed by the movement, began to stir against her. "Shh, sweet one," Penelope whispered, pausing to catch her breath. "Just a little farther." When she reached the ledge where Matthew waited, he helped pull her up beside him. "You're doing well," he encouraged. "Just another 50 feet to the rim." They continued their ascent, Matthew always slightly above her, ready to offer a hand when needed. Emma, miraculously, remained quiet, as if sensing the importance of silence. They were nearing the top when disaster struck. Penelope reached for what appeared to be a solid handhold, only to have the rock crumble beneath her fingers. She slipped, a cry escaping her lips as she felt herself falling backward. In an instant, Matthew's hand shot out, grasping her wrist in an iron grip. For a terrifying moment, she dangled above the canyon floor, Emma's weight pulling her down, Matthew's strength the only thing preventing a fatal fall. With a grunt of exertion, he pulled her upward, his muscles straining visibly even in the moonlight. When she had regained her footing, they clung to the rock face, both breathing heavily. "Are you all right?" Matthew whispered, his face inches from hers. Penelope nodded, unable to speak. Emma, disturbed by the commotion, had begun to whimper softly. From below, a voice called up. "They're on the wall. Shoot them down." The crack of a rifle echoed through the canyon, the bullet striking rock just feet away from them. "Climb," Matthew urged, pushing Penelope ahead of him. "Don't stop for anything." Heart pounding, Penelope scrambled upward, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. Bullets ricocheted off the rock around them, showering them with stone fragments. Matthew stayed close behind her, occasionally returning fire with his revolver to force their attackers to take cover. When Penelope's hands finally grasped the rim of the canyon, she pulled herself over with the last of her strength, collapsing onto the flat ground above. Matthew followed moments later, rolling away from the edge as more bullets struck nearby. "We need to move," he gasped, helping her to her feet. "They'll be looking for a way up." Supporting each other, they stumbled away from the canyon edge, heading north through the moonlit landscape. Emma, exhausted by the ordeal, had fallen back to sleep against Penelope's chest. They had covered perhaps half a mile when the sound of hoofbeats reached them. Matthew pushed Penelope behind a large rock formation, drawing his revolver. "It's just one rider," he whispered, peering around the rocks. The lone horseman approached cautiously, his silhouette visible in the moonlight. As he drew nearer, Matthew's tense posture relaxed slightly. "Blackfoot," he murmured to Penelope. "Wait here." Before she could protest, Matthew stepped out from behind the rocks, raising his empty hand in greeting. "Hello, friend," he called, keeping his revolver lowered but ready. The rider halted, studying Matthew warily. He was a young man, perhaps in his early 20s, dressed in a mixture of native and settler clothing. Matthew spoke a few words in what Penelope assumed was the Blackfoot language. The young man responded, his expression cautious but not hostile. After a brief exchange, Matthew turned back to Penelope. "It's safe. He's offered us shelter in his camp for the night." Penelope emerged hesitantly from behind the rocks, Emma still sleeping in the sling. The young Blackfoot man's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the baby, but he nodded in greeting. "This is Running Elk," Matthew explained. "His father is a friend to settlers who respect their ways." Running Elk dismounted, offering his horse to Penelope with a gesture that transcended language barriers. She hesitated, looking to Matthew. "It's an honor," Matthew explained quietly. "He's offering you and Emma protection." Touched by the unexpected kindness, Penelope allowed Running Elk to help her onto the horse, adjusting Emma carefully in the sling. Matthew walked alongside as Running Elk led them through the moonlit wilderness. After about an hour of travel, they crested a small rise to see a cluster of teepees in the valley below, small cook fires glowing like earthbound stars. As they approached the camp, several men emerged to meet them, their expressions curious but not unwelcoming. Running Elk spoke rapidly, gesturing toward Matthew and Penelope. An older man stepped forward, his weathered face solemn as he studied the newcomers. "Chief Gray Wolf," Matthew said respectfully, inclining his head. "Thank you for your hospitality." The chief responded in English, his voice deep and measured. "Marshal O'Brien, you have traveled far from your territory. We seek safe passage," Matthew explained, briefly recounting their flight from Holloway's men. Gray Wolf listened intently, his dark eyes occasionally shifting to Penelope and the sleeping Emma. When Matthew finished speaking, the chief was silent for a long moment. "The men who hunt you disrespect all laws, white man's and Blackfoot," he said finally. "You may rest here tonight. Tomorrow, we will guide you safely to your destination." Relief washed over Penelope, bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply, the words inadequate for the gratitude she felt. They were led to a small teepee at the edge of the camp. Inside, soft furs covered the ground, and a small fire burned in the center pit, filling the space with warmth and the pleasant scent of cedar. Running Elk's sister, a young woman named Singing Bird, brought them a simple meal of venison stew and flat bread. She cooed softly at Emma, who had awakened and was gazing around with wide, curious eyes. "Your daughter has a strong spirit," Singing Bird observed, smiling as Emma grasped her finger. "She will grow to be a brave woman like her mother." After they had eaten, Singing Bird withdrew, leaving Matthew and Penelope alone with Emma. The exhaustion of the day's events suddenly overwhelmed Penelope, and she swayed where she sat. "Sleep," Matthew urged gently, helping her arrange the furs into a comfortable bed. "I'll keep watch." "You need rest too," Penelope protested weakly. "I'll rest," he promised, "but I gave my word to guard your steps, and I mean to keep it." Too tired to argue further, Penelope settled onto the furs with Emma beside her. As her eyes drifted closed, she felt Matthew drape a blanket over them both, his hand lingering briefly on her shoulder. In the flickering firelight, safe for the moment from the dangers that pursued them, Penelope surrendered to exhaustion. Her last conscious thought was of Matthew's promise to guard her steps until they reached safety. Somehow, in the space of 2 days, this man had become her sanctuary, as solid and dependable as the earth beneath her feet. And in the quiet of her heart, a small voice whispered that perhaps, when this ordeal was over, they might find a new path forward, one they could walk together. The sunrise brought new hope as Penelope awoke to find Emma contentedly playing with a small leather toy that Singing Bird had crafted for her. Matthew was deep in conversation with Chief Gray Wolf and 2 other men at the entrance to the teepee, their voices low and serious. When he noticed she was awake, Matthew excused himself and came to kneel beside her. "Sleep well?" he asked, his voice gentler than she'd heard before. "Better than I expected," she admitted, pushing her tangled hair from her face. "What's happening?" "Gray Wolf scouts have spotted Holloway's men searching the area south of the canyon," Matthew explained. "They're avoiding Blackfoot territory for now, but they haven't given up." "How far are we from Silver Ridge?" Penelope asked, lifting Emma into her arms. "About 15 miles as the crow flies. Gray Wolf has offered 2 of his men as guides to lead us through the mountain passes. We can be there by nightfall if we push hard." Singing Bird entered with a simple breakfast of dried berries and more flat bread. She sat beside Penelope, showing her how to tie Emma securely to her back in the native fashion. "This will be easier for the journey," she explained, her English accented but clear. "The baby will be comfortable and your hands will be free." Penelope thanked her, grateful for the practical help. As she ate, she studied Matthew's profile. In the morning light, she could see the toll the past 2 days had taken on him. Deep shadows circled his eyes and stubble darkened his jaw. Despite his exhaustion, he maintained an alert vigilance that spoke of years of discipline. After breakfast, they prepared to depart. Chief Gray Wolf presented Matthew with a rifle and ammunition, a valuable gift that the marshal accepted with appropriate solemnity. To Penelope's surprise, the chief also offered her a small leather pouch. "Medicine," he explained, pointing to Emma. "If the little one becomes sick on your journey." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Penelope thanked him with genuine warmth. They left the Blackfoot camp with 2 guides running elk and a slightly older man named Strong Horse. The day was clear, the sky an endless expanse of blue above the towering pines that surrounded them. Emma, secure in her new carrier, seemed to enjoy the gentle bouncing motion as they walked, occasionally gurgling happily at particularly interesting birds or patterns of sunlight. The Blackfoot guides led them along trails invisible to Penelope's untrained eye, moving swiftly but carefully through the wilderness. Matthew stayed close to her side, occasionally offering his hand at difficult stretches of the path. "Your friends are unexpected allies," Penelope remarked as they paused to rest beside a small mountain stream. Matthew smiled slightly, accepting the water skin she offered. "Most folks have the wrong idea about the Blackfoot. They're not looking for trouble, just wanting to protect what's theirs, same as anyone." "How did you come to know them so well?" "My first winter as marshal, there was an outbreak of influenza in their camp," Matthew explained, his gaze distant with memory. "The Indian agent refused to help, said it wasn't his problem. I brought what medicines the town could spare and stayed to help care for the sick." "That was brave," Penelope observed, watching as Emma splashed her hands in the cool water. Matthew shrugged, embarrassed by her praise. "Just did what needed doing. Gray Wolf's youngest daughter was among those who recovered. He hasn't forgotten. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the terrain gradually changing as they descended from the higher elevations. The forest thinned, giving way to rolling meadows dotted with wildflowers. In the distance, smoke rose from what must be chimneys in Silver Ridge. As they neared the outskirts of town, Running Elk and Strong Horse stopped. "We go no further," Running Elk explained. "White man's town not good for Blackfoot." Matthew clasped forearms with both men. "Thank your father for his help," he told Running Elk. "Tell him Marshal O'Brien stands as a friend to the Blackfoot people." After the guides had disappeared back into the forest, Matthew and Penelope continued toward Silver Ridge. The town was larger than Willow Creek, with proper wooden sidewalks along the main street and a two-story hotel that spoke of prosperity. "Jacob's store is at the far end," Matthew said, nodding toward a large building with Peterson's General Merchandise painted above the door. As they approached, a heavy-set man with a friendly face emerged, wiping his hands on his apron. His expression brightened when he recognized Matthew. "Matt, beginning to think you weren't coming," he called, hurrying forward to clasp Matthew's hand warmly. His gaze shifted to Penelope and Emma. "And this must be Mrs. Granger and the little one. Sarah's been preparing the room since your telegram arrived." Jacob Peterson ushered them inside, calling for his wife as they entered the well-stocked store. Sarah Peterson appeared from the back room, a plump, cheerful woman whose motherly demeanor immediately put Penelope at ease. "You poor dears look exhausted," she declared, taking Emma from Penelope's back carrier with practiced hands. "Come upstairs. I've hot water for washing and stew on the stove." The room above the store was small but comfortable, with a bed, cradle, and small table with chairs. A curtain divided the space, creating a semblance of privacy. Sarah fussed over Emma while Jacob brought up their few belongings. "The school board meets tomorrow," Jacob informed Penelope as he set her satchel on the table. "I've already mentioned you might be interested in the teaching position. They're quite eager to meet you." Penelope glanced at Matthew, who nodded encouragingly. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. That's very kind." "Jacob, please," he insisted. "Any friend of Matt's is family to us." When the Petersons had gone downstairs to close the store for the night, Penelope turned to Matthew. "You've arranged everything," she said softly. "How can I ever repay you?" Matthew looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "There's nothing to repay. I did what any decent man would do." "We both know that's not true," Penelope countered. "Most men would have looked the other way. You risked everything for a woman and child you barely knew." "I knew enough," he replied simply. "Knew you didn't deserve what Holloway had planned." Emma, fed and clean, was falling asleep in the cradle Sarah had provided. Penelope gently stroked her daughter's cheek, overwhelmed by the events of the past days and the uncertain future that lay ahead. "When will you return to Willow Creek?" she asked, dreading the answer. Matthew's expression hardened. "Tomorrow. Holloway needs to be held accountable. I can't let him continue terrorizing innocent people." "He'll kill you," Penelope said bluntly, fear making her voice sharp. "He has too many men loyal to him." "Perhaps," Matthew acknowledged. "But if no one stands against men like Holloway, they win by default." Penelope crossed the small room to stand before him, searching his face. "There are other ways to fight, other places that need a good lawman." "Are you asking me to stay, Penelope?" he asked quietly, his gaze holding hers. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to voice aloud. 3 days ago, he had been a near stranger. Now, he was the man who had saved her life and her child's, who had shown her kindness and courage when she needed it most. "I'm asking you not to throw your life away on a vendetta," she said finally. "It's not vengeance," he insisted. It's justice. And what justice is there in leaving Emma without the man who protected her? Penelope challenged. What justice in leaving me? She stopped abruptly, realizing she had revealed more than she intended. Matthew's expression softened. He reached out slowly, giving her time to step away if she chose. When she remained still, he gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. I need to finish what I started, he said softly. But Penelope, if I survive this, if I can bring Holloway to proper justice, would you consider allowing me to court you properly? The question caught her by surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't have. In the crucible of danger and shared struggle, something had grown between them, something fragile but undeniably real. Thomas has been gone less than 2 months, she whispered, the admission painful. I'm not sure what I feel or if I'm ready. I understand, Matthew said, beginning to withdraw his hand. Penelope caught it, holding it against her cheek. But I do know that when I thought of building a new life here, you were part of that vision. I'm not ready to lose you just as I've found you. Matthew's eyes darkened with emotion. I can't make promises I might not be able to keep, but I can promise you this: I will do everything in my power to return to you and Emma. Impulsively, Penelope rose on tiptoe and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. Then I will hold you to that promise, Marshal O'Brien. A soft knock at the door interrupted the moment. Jacob entered with a telegram in hand, his expression troubled. This just came for you, Matt, he said, handing over the yellow paper. Matthew read it quickly, his face paling. Holloway's gathered a posse, he said grimly. They're claiming legal authority to pursue us for the murder of one of his men. But that's absurd, Penelope protested. We haven't killed anyone. Truth doesn't matter to Holloway, Matthew replied, crumpling the telegram in his fist. He's fabricating charges to give his manhunt legitimacy. Jacob cleared his throat nervously. There's more, Matt. Word is they're heading this way. Someone must have seen you enter town. Penelope's heart sank. Their brief moment of safety had been an illusion. How long do we have? Matthew asked, already moving to check his revolver and the rifle Grey Wolf had given him. Dawn, maybe, Jacob estimated. The sheriff here is a good man, but he won't stand against a legal posse, even if he suspects the charges are false. Matthew paced the small room, his mind clearly racing. We need to leave before first light, head north into Montana Territory. No, Penelope said firmly, surprising both men. I'm tired of running. Emma deserves better than a life spent looking over our shoulders. What are you suggesting? Matthew asked, studying her with new respect. We face Holloway here, she declared. On our terms, not his. Jacob looked alarmed. Mrs. Granger, Holloway will bring at least 12 men. Even with the sheriff's help, we don't need a gunfight, Penelope interrupted. We need witnesses. Respectable people who can testify to Holloway's true nature. She turned to Matthew. You said the telegraph operator in Willow Creek was sympathetic to us. Matthew nodded slowly, beginning to understand her thinking. Jim Wilson. He's no friend of Holloway's. Send him a telegram, Penelope urged. Ask him to bring anyone who witnessed Thomas's confrontation with Holloway's son, anyone who can speak to the truth. It's risky, Matthew warned, if Holloway intercepts the message. It's our best chance, Penelope insisted. Force a public confrontation where Holloway can't simply gun us down without consequences. Matthew and Jacob exchanged glances, both clearly surprised by her boldness. It might work, Jacob admitted reluctantly. The circuit judge is due in Silver Ridge tomorrow for the monthly court session. If we could present our case directly to him, we'd bypass the local sheriff entirely, Matthew finished, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. For the first time since fleeing Willow Creek, Penelope felt a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. Emma and I have been running long enough, she said quietly. It's time to stand our ground. As the night deepened around Silver Ridge, plans were set in motion. Jacob left to send the telegram to Jim Wilson, while Sarah helped Penelope prepare for the confrontation to come. Matthew cleaned his weapons and spoke with trusted friends in town, building a network of support for the morning. In the quiet hours before dawn, as Emma slept peacefully in her cradle, Penelope and Matthew sat at the small table, hands clasped between them. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Penelope said softly, "I want you to know that I'm grateful for every step you've guarded." Matthew's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "When I made that promise in the woods, I didn't understand what it would mean," he admitted. "I thought I was simply doing my duty, but Penelope, somewhere along the way it became more than duty." The simple confession warmed her heart more than any flowery declaration could have done. "For me too," she whispered. As the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, they prepared to face whatever the new day would bring together. The morning sun cast long shadows down Silver Ridge's Main Street as Matthew positioned himself on the boardwalk outside the courthouse. Judge Harrison Blackwell had arrived at dawn, and after hearing their situation, had agreed to an emergency hearing. Inside the courthouse, Penelope waited with Emma, surrounded by allies the Petersons, the local minister and his wife, and 3 witnesses from Willow Creek who had arrived on the early stage, responding to Jim Wilson's telegram. Matthew checked his pocket watch for the 3rd time in as many minutes. According to their scouts, Holloway's posse was less than a mile outside of town. Everything depended on timing now, getting Holloway and his men into the courthouse before any violence could erupt. The thunder of approaching hoofbeats drew Matthew's attention to the southern end of town. A cloud of dust heralded the arrival of Jasper Holloway and his men, 15 riders strong, their faces grim with purpose. Matthew stepped into the street, his marshal's badge gleaming in the morning light. Behind him, Sheriff Tanner of Silver Ridge and his 2 deputies took up positions, rifles ready but not aimed. Holloway reined his horse to a stop 20 paces from Matthew, his weathered face twisted with hatred. "Marshal O'Brien," he spat, "you're harboring a fugitive and interfering with legal justice. Stand aside." "The only fugitive here is you, Holloway," Matthew replied calmly. "Running from the law you claim to uphold." Holloway's face darkened. "My son was murdered by that woman's husband, and now she's killed one of my best men. I have every right to bring her to justice." "Interesting claim," Matthew observed, "considering Thomas Granger was cleared of any wrongdoing in your son's death, and Mrs. Granger has been in my presence continuously since we left Willow Creek. Hard for her to have killed anyone." Murmurs rippled through the crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation. Several of Holloway's men shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. "You calling me a liar, Marshal?" Holloway demanded, his hand moving toward his revolver. "I'm calling you a grieving father who's let vengeance cloud his judgment," Matthew replied, his voice softening slightly. "And I'm offering you a chance to resolve this properly before the circuit judge who's waiting inside that courthouse." Holloway laughed harshly. "You expect me to walk into a trap? I wasn't born yesterday, O'Brien." "No trap," Sheriff Tanner interjected, stepping forward. "Just justice, witnessed by the good people of Silver Ridge. You want the Granger woman. You'll have to make your case to the judge, same as anyone else." Holloway's gaze swept the growing crowd, clearly calculating his options. Violence in the street would be messy, with too many witnesses. But a legal proceeding might be manipulated, especially with his reputation and wealth. "Fine," he said finally, dismounting with exaggerated care. "We'll do this your way, Marshal. But if that judge doesn't give me satisfaction, I'll take matters into my own hands." Matthew nodded to Sheriff Tanner, who directed his deputies to escort Holloway and 2 of his men into the courthouse. The rest of the posse was ordered to remain outside, closely watched by armed townspeople who had rallied to defend their community from outsiders bringing trouble. Inside the courthouse, Judge Blackwell called the impromptu hearing to order. Penelope sat at a small table with Matthew beside her, Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms. Across the aisle, Holloway and his men glared at them with undisguised malice. The judge, a stern-faced man with penetrating gray eyes, addressed the assembly. This court has been convened to address serious allegations against Mrs. Penelope Granger and Marshal Matthew O'Brien. Mr. Holloway claims the right of pursuit based on charges of murder and obstruction of justice. He fixed Holloway with a penetrating stare. "Present your evidence, sir." Holloway rose, straightening his expensive coat. "Your Honor, 3 days ago, my foreman Frank Dawson was shot dead while attempting to bring Mrs. Granger in for questioning regarding her husband's killing of my son. Marshal O'Brien interfered with legal proceedings and fled with the woman, making them both fugitives from justice. And your authority for attempting to apprehend Mrs. Granger?" the judge inquired mildly. "I'm the largest landowner in Willow Creek," Holloway declared, as if that explained everything. "The local law answers to me." A ripple of disapproval moved through the spectators. "That's not how the law works in this territory," Judge Blackwell observed dryly. "Unless you've been appointed sheriff when I wasn't looking," Holloway's face reddened. "The sheriff was indisposed. I was acting in the community's interest." "I see," the judge said, making a note. "And the circumstances of your foreman's death, do you have witnesses?" "2 of my men saw O'Brien shoot him down," Holloway claimed, gesturing to the men beside him. Before either could speak, Matthew rose. "Your Honor, I request permission to present contradictory evidence." The judge nodded. "Proceed, Marshal." "First, regarding Thomas Granger's confrontation with Holloway's son," Matthew began. "I have 3 witnesses from Willow Creek who were present that night. Jim Wilson, the telegraph operator, took the stand first, followed by the town doctor and the bartender from the Silver Dollar Saloon. All 3 testified that young Holloway had been drunk and aggressive, that Thomas had repeatedly tried to avoid confrontation, and that he had acted in self-defense when Holloway's son drew a knife. Next, Matthew presented a sworn statement from the Willow Creek undertaker, confirming Thomas Granger had died of pneumonia 3 weeks ago, a natural death with no evidence of foul play. As for the alleged murder of Frank Dawson, Matthew continued, Mrs. Granger and her daughter were in my continuous presence from the moment I encountered them fleeing their home until now. Neither of us fired a shot until Holloway's men cornered us in a box canyon 2 days ago, well after the time Dawson was supposedly killed." Penelope watched Holloway's face as the evidence mounted against him. The rancher's expression had shifted from confidence to growing alarm. "Furthermore," Matthew added, "I'd like to call Sarah Peterson to testify about Mrs. Granger's character and intentions regarding the teaching position here in Silver Ridge, hardly the actions of a fugitive murderer." Sarah's testimony was brief, but powerful, describing Penelope as a devoted mother seeking a fresh start after widowhood. When all witnesses had spoken, Judge Blackwell removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully. "Mr. Holloway, the evidence suggests you've been pursuing a personal vendetta against Mrs. Granger, not justice. The death of your son, while tragic, was ruled self-defense by proper authorities. Your subsequent actions appear to constitute harassment, intimidation, and abuse of perceived authority." "This is outrageous," Holloway sputtered, rising to his feet. "You can't possibly—" "Sit down, sir," the judge ordered sharply. I'm not finished. Holloway subsided, seething visibly. Based on the testimony presented, this court finds no cause for charges against Mrs. Penelope Granger or Marshal Matthew O'Brien. Furthermore, I am issuing a restraining order prohibiting you, Mr. Holloway, from approaching within 100 yards of Mrs. Granger or her child. The judge's gaze hardened. I am also forwarding a recommendation to the territorial governor that your actions be investigated for possible criminal charges. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and scattered applause. Penelope felt tears of relief spring to her eyes as she clutched Emma closer. Holloway stood, his face contorted with rage. "This isn't over," he hissed. "No one crosses Jasper Holloway and gets away with it." "That's enough, Mr. Holloway," Sheriff Tanner warned, moving to escort the rancher from the courtroom. As Holloway and his men were led outside, Penelope turned to Matthew, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "It's over, truly over." Matthew took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Holloway won't give up easily, but he won't risk direct action now. The judge's ruling gives us legal protection, and his reputation in the territory has been damaged. His power was always built on fear more than respect." "What happens now?" she asked, adjusting Emma in her arms. "Now," Matthew said with a smile, "you have a school board to impress and I have a badge to return." Penelope's heart sank. "You're still leaving." "Only to resign properly," he assured her. "I've been thinking about what you said. There are other ways to fight injustice, other communities that need good men, including this one." Hope fluttered in Penelope's chest. "You're staying in Silver Ridge, if you'll have me," Matthew replied softly. "Sheriff Tanner mentioned needing a deputy, and I thought, well, it might be a good place to start fresh, for all of us." The simple declaration contained so much promise that Penelope felt momentarily speechless. After all they had endured, after the fear and flight and uncertainty, the prospect of building something permanent together seemed almost too precious to believe. "I'd like that very much," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Matthew's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Then it settled. In the weeks that followed, life developed a new rhythm. Penelope secured the teaching position at the Silver Ridge School, her natural aptitude for education quickly earning the respect of the community and the adoration of her young pupils. Emma thrived in their small but comfortable home, growing stronger and more curious each day. Matthew returned briefly to Willow Creek to resign his position and collect his few possessions. Holloway, his influence diminished by the judge's ruling and subsequent investigations, made no move against him. By the time Matthew returned to Silver Ridge to take up his new role as deputy sheriff, whispers had already begun about the handsome lawman and the pretty schoolteacher with the baby daughter. Their courtship progressed with deliberate care. Matthew understood Penelope's need to honor Thomas's memory while moving forward, and she appreciated his patience. They took evening walks with Emma, shared Sunday dinners with the Petersons, and gradually built a foundation of trust and mutual respect that deepened with each passing day. 6 months after their arrival in Silver Ridge on a crisp autumn evening, Matthew proposed. They were sitting on the porch of Penelope's small house, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson. Emma, now crawling and babbling with increasing complexity, played contentedly at their feet. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment," Matthew admitted, producing a simple silver ring with a small pearl at its center. "It was my mother's, I thought. I hoped you might accept it as a token of my intentions." Penelope looked from the ring to the man offering it, her heart full to bursting. 6 months ago, she had fled into the night with nothing but her child and terror as companions. Now she had found not just safety, but a love she had never expected to experience again. "Matthew O'Brien," she said softly, "you promised to guard our steps till sunrise, but you've given us so much more. You've given us a future." She extended her hand, smiling through tears of joy. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." They were married in the Silver Ridge Church the following spring, with Emma, now walking unsteadily but with determined enthusiasm, serving as an impromptu flower girl. The entire town turned out for the celebration, embracing the new family as their own. Years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Penelope continued teaching, eventually becoming the school's headmistress. Matthew rose from deputy to sheriff when Tanner retired, his fair-minded approach to justice earning him the respect of the community. Emma grew into a bright, spirited girl with her mother's grace and her stepfather's steadfast courage. 2 more children joined their family, a son they named Thomas, in honor of Penelope's first husband, and a daughter they called Catherine, for Matthew's first wife. Their home became known throughout the region as a place of warmth and welcome, where travelers could find a hot meal and good company. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Matthew and Penelope stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over the mountains. "Ever regret it?" Matthew asked quietly, his arm around Penelope's waist. Staying in Silver Ridge instead of moving on, Penelope leaned her head against his shoulder, considering the question. "Not for a moment," she replied honestly. "This is where we were meant to be." Matthew pressed a kiss to her temple. "That night in the forest when I promised to guard your steps till sunrise, I never imagined where those steps would lead us." "To home," Penelope said simply, turning in his arms to meet his gaze. "You guided us home." As twilight deepened into night and stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, their lips met in a kiss that spoke of promises kept and new ones still to make. The journey that had begun in fear had led them to this moment of perfect contentment, a family forged in adversity, strengthened by love, and built to last through whatever challenges the future might bring. In the distance, a wolf howled, a reminder of the wilderness from which they had come. But here, in the circle of each other's arms, with their children's laughter echoing from the yard, Penelope and Matthew O'Brien had found something rare and precious. Not just survival, but a life worth living, guard every step of the way.